Hey people, it's Nayan talking. Now I would like to thank an Instagram page called The Humanity Archive for posting about this. Now the story I'm using is the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, so its website domain is like humanrights.ca/story underscore Africville. So anyway, let's go. The story of Africville, a black community displaced by racism. Africville was a close-knit black community in the north end of Halifax for over 120 years. The city demolished Africville in the 1960s, and its residents have been fighting for justice ever since. If you've never heard of Africville, you're not alone. The story of the destruction of this small black community in Nova Scotia is not as well known as it should be. It is part of a much larger story of black settlers in Nova Scotia, which goes back hundreds of years. Black settlement in Nova Scotia. Black people have lived in Nova Scotia since well before the city of Halifax was founded on Micmac territory in 1749. There are records of black people in Nova Scotia dating to the early 1600s, and many colonial settlements, including Louisbourg, brought enslaved black people to the East Coast indirectly via the transatlantic slave trade. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, after the American Revolution and the War of 1812, large groups of black settlers began to arrive in the province. Many of them were formerly enslaved people who had been promised freedom and land in Nova Scotia. But when they arrived, they encountered white settlers who viewed them as inferior. Because of racism, black settlers were pushed to the margins of society and forced to live on the most inhospitable land. Despite this, they persevered, developing strong, vibrant communities. Africville was one such place. You weren't isolated at any time living in Africville. You always felt at home. The doors were always open. Irvine Carvery, former Africville resident, a close-knit black community. Africville was a primarily black community located on the south shore of the Bedford Basin on the outskirts of Halifax. The first records of a black presence in Africville date back to 1848, and it continued to exist for over 120 years. Over that time, hundreds of individuals and families lived there and built a thriving, close-knit community. There were stores, a school, a post office, and the Seaview United Baptist Church, which was Africville's spiritual and social center. Unfortunately, discrimination and poverty presented many challenges for the community of people in Africville. The city of Halifax refused to provide many amenities other Haligonians took for granted, such as sewage, access to clean water, and garbage disposal. Africville residents who paid taxes and took pride in their homes asked the city to provide these basic services on numerous occasions, but no action was taken. I wanted to take a moment to stop and reflect here. Now, people keep talking and saying, black people are being asking for handouts. Here, they are asking for their community that they pay taxes to just provide basic services, and they don't get it. This is a major issue. I've said that to this day, black people pay taxes and are told repeatedly they cannot have policies that meet their needs. In fact, according to them, any policy that is given specifically to black people is racist, but policies given to other people using black people's taxpayer money, like Native Americans, is perfectly fine. So even though black people did not have anything to do with the destruction of Native Americans, and in fact were victims of Native Americans, if you look up the 5 civilized tribes and their slaves, they still have to pay reparations to them via their tax money. But it's considered racist for black people to ask for reparations for them. This is something that must be spoken about. And all these things happened not a long time ago. This community is in living memory. Obama is older than this community. Let's never forget. But no action was taken. The city compounded the problem by building many undesirable developments in and around Africville, including an infectious disease hospital, a prison, and a dump. And that's another way they terrorize black communities. Let's put all the worst stuff near them. Africville residents did not receive water and sewer services provided to Halifax residents. For their water supply, they relied upon an assortment of wells. Instead of providing proper municipal services to the community, the city of Halifax eventually decided to relocate the residents of Africville. The city said it wanted to build industry and infrastructure in the area, but it also used the language of human rights to justify its decision, claiming that its relocation would improve the standard of living for residents. And this is another thing. You see them saying, we're doing things for black people. We're painting Black Lives Matter on the road. Anything that black people ask for is never paid attention to. Could you just provide us municipal services like sewage sewerage and water services. No, 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 no. What you need is to have your community demolition, and you need to move to a new home. In January 1964, Halifax City Council voted to authorize the relocation of Africville residents. There was no meaningful consultation with residents of Africville to gather their views. Fewer than 20% of residents had any contact with the Halifax Human Rights Advisory Committee, the group charged with consulting the community. The destruction of Africville took several years. And that's another thing. Many of these black leaders who claim to talk for black people are, weirdo outsiders who don't have any grassroots support. The fact is, if there was ever an election for any of these black misleaders, as Professor Black Truth talks about, they would probably not get any votes. No one would even know who they are. The destruction of Africville took several years. Residents who could prove they owned their land were offered payment equal to the value of their houses. Residents without proof, many residents did not have deeds, even if their families had lived on the site for generations, were offered $500. And keep in mind, even back then in the mid-60s, that wasn't a lot of money. Those who resisted relocation could have their lands expropriated by the city. There was also some accounts of bribery and intimidation being used against residents to force them from their neighborhood. The city demolished homes as soon as they were vacated. Infamously, officials bulldozed Seaview United Baptist Church, considered by many the heart of the community, in the middle of the night on November 20th, 1967. In the end, despite resistance, all residents were relocated. The last remaining Africville home was destroyed in January of 1970. Africville resident Dorothy Carvery was removed from her home by a City of Halifax garbage truck. Sunday Miller, the former executive director of the Africville Heritage and Trust, describes the relocation as very hard on many residents. She called a city worker who moved an old woman out of her home in a garbage truck. The worker said, "I remember this woman because she was between me and the driver, and she cried all the way into the city because she didn't want to leave. Didn't know why they were making her leave. What really bothered me, she didn't even know where she was going. They could have taken her anywhere." To make matters worse, the city of Halifax dismantled the social supports intended to assist former residents only 3 years after relocation began. Many residents found it difficult to adjust to their new lives. I mean, think about it. If you've lived in a place for your whole life, the social support should take, at least, 10 years at minimum, or 20 years to do it properly. But nope. Miller says when people of Africville were here, they were self-sufficient. They might not have had a lot of money, but they weren't on government assistance. They were trying to create a community that the government wasn't willing for them to leave. When they took them off this land, forced them to be a ward of the government, which will happen for those who went into social housing, it took their dignity from them. And this is another thing I want to say. They keep saying, "You black people pull yourselves up by your bootstraps." When black people do things for themselves, they come in, they harass them, they terrorize them, they take it away, they burn it down, they use eminent domain to take it off them for redevelopment, highways, industry, or it's in your best interest. Never mind the fact that you were fine the way you were and nobody asked you. This is another form of ethnic cleansing. That's what it is. It's ethnic cleansing. People who don't want to move, forced out. I mean, how often do you see white communities in America or Canada forced out in this way? Living in Africville, we had our own home. It might not have been a mansion, but it was a home. Former Africville residents also faced racism in their new homes. In one case, a white neighbor is reported to have begun a petition opposed to accepting a black family. In another, a man moving from Africville to the neighborhood of Hammond Plains received a letter threatening to burn his house down if he and his family did not leave. It was signed from the white people of Hammond Plains. And this is another thing, another cause for reparations. People have been moved to situations that they didn't want to be in that put them in danger. How much must that be worth? Despite these challenges, former residents took action and sought justice. In 1969, residents created the Africville Action Committee to support and advocate for displaced residents. In the 1980s, the Africville Genealogy Society was formed and began to seek compensation for the suffering caused by the destruction of the community. In 2010, a settlement was finally reached. The mayor of Halifax made a public apology for the razing of Africville. Oh God, one of these public apologies. Part of the compensation was to build a replica of Seaview Church, which now serves as Africville Museum. Not all former residents accept the apology, however, and some are continuing to seek individual compensation for what they suffered. And there's another thing, these black misleaders. How is this compensation? The church that was the center of your community will build one that looks like it, and you can have a museum showcasing the shattered remnants of your former life. Your home was destroyed, your community was destroyed, your life was put in danger by being put in a community where they didn't want you and you didn't want to be there. Here, have a museum. This is disgusting. Lyndall Smith is a Halifax City Council for District 8, which includes the site of the former community of Africville. As only the second black city councillor ever elected in Halifax, he is happy the city has apologized and feels it is very important that Haligonians and all Canadians know what happened in Africville. The only reason that Africville is not here today is because of what the city did to the community. A lot of Canadians don't know the history around that. Some people knew it was a black community but don't know why it's no longer there. I think it's important to remember the terrible things that happened, the discrimination and displacement. But also the people of Africville had ownership and a sense of community, and that is something to celebrate. Again, I think this guy, I'm not sure if I'm understanding this, but this is absolutely ridiculous. How is he happy for this museum? So if you really wanted it, a whole new community should be built where all the residents can opt to move, which will meet all their demands in a place that is fit to live with all the things that human beings need, and it should be given to them for free as compensation. And when I say free, I really mean that, because I think there was this reparation scheme that they were doing in Evanston, a suburb of Chicago, where they were saying they would give housing vouchers equivalent for $25,000 to buy a house or something. And people were like, the cost of housing, that wouldn't even cover a deposit on a house, let alone to get one. It's nothing. It's the same thing. The story of Africville is a stark reminder that language of human rights can sometimes be used to support rights violations. It shows the whole community is, well, this had nothing to do with human rights. It's just some people who said, is this whole, I'm white and I know better than you. You need to be moved out of your home. Never mind the fact that you are happy here and you didn't ask me to. I know better than you. It shows that whole communities as well as individuals can suffer the consequences of racism, and it teaches that we must always ensure that all the voices in our community are heard, especially those too often silenced by marginalization and discrimination. Africville has become a symbol of why black organization and solidarity are necessary to fight racism. Donald Claremont, former professor of sociology at Dalhousie University. This story was written in part using research conducted by Mallory Richard, who worked at the museum as both a researcher and a project coordinator. Well, thanks to the researchers at the museum. Oh wait, no, not the. I don't know which museum they're talking about. Is it the Canadian Museum for Human Rights or the Africville Museum? But whoever, thank you to them. So anyway, I'm not sure if YouTube will let me put this link in the description, but if not, I have listed where it is. It's the website is the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, and if you just do a web search, Africville, Canada, Nova Scotia, it will come up. So anyway, please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. Peace.